The Atlanta summer pressed down like a weight that wouldn't lift. Dr. Grace Holloway stood at the emergency room entrance of Grady Memorial Hospital, 9 months pregnant, and exhausted in ways that went deeper than her swollen feet could explain. The scrubs clung to her rounded belly, and every step felt like wading through thick water. She pressed a hand to her lower back and exhaled slowly, watching the traffic crawl past on Peachtree Street. "Just one more week," she whispered to herself, rubbing the tight skin where her son kicked restlessly. "One more week and we'll figure out the rest." But Grace had been figuring things out alone for months now. Ever since the pregnancy test had shown 2 pink lines, ever since her medical license had been suspended for unpaid renewal fees, ever since the eviction notice had been taped to her apartment door. She'd survived on hope, prayer, and the kindness of her best friend Tasha, who'd given her a couch to sleep on and refused to let her give up. Grace had worked too hard to give up. She'd clawed her way through medical school on scholarships and night shifts, through residency on coffee and sheer determination. She'd dreamed of opening a women's clinic one day, a place where mothers like her, single, struggling, scared, could get care without judgment. But dreams didn't pay bills and bills didn't care about dreams. The sun hung low now, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. Grace adjusted her hospital badge and took one last breath of the humid air before heading back inside. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but she'd stayed late to help with a difficult delivery. That was Grace, always staying, always helping, even when her own body begged her to rest. She was halfway across the street when she heard it. The scream of tires, the sickening thud of impact, the sudden, terrible silence that followed. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. She spun around and saw the crowd already forming, people shouting, car horns blaring, someone yelling into a phone. In the middle of the chaos, a man lay motionless on the asphalt, blood pooling dark and wet beneath his head. Her training kicked in before her fear could catch up. "Move," Grace shouted, pushing through the gathering crowd. "I'm a doctor, let me through." She dropped to her knees beside him, her belly pressing against her thighs as she leaned forward. His face was pale, his breathing shallow and uneven. Blood trickled from a gash along his temple and his eyes were closed, unseeing. Grace pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, fluttering, fading fast. "Someone call 911, she yelled, her voice sharp and commanding despite the tremor in her hands. "They're on the way," a man shouted back. Grace didn't wait. She positioned her hands over the man's chest and began compressions, counting aloud with each push. 1, 2, 3, 4. A sharp stabbing pain ripped through her abdomen. She gasped, her rhythm faltering for just a second. "No, not now, please, not now." But her body didn't listen. Warmth flooded between her legs, and she felt the unmistakable sensation of her water breaking, soaking through her scrubs and onto the hot pavement beneath her. "Oh my God, she's in labor," someone in the crowd screamed. Grace clenched her teeth, forcing herself to focus. She pressed down harder on the man's chest, her vision blurring with pain and determination. "Not yet," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Not till I save him." Another contraction seized her, fierce and unrelenting. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This man, whoever he was, needed her, and Grace had never walked away from someone who needed her. "Come on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Breathe for me, please, just breathe." The sirens wailed closer, cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. Grace's arms ached, her body screamed, but she kept going, kept counting, kept fighting. For him, for her baby, for the fragile hope that somehow, against all odds, they would both make it through this moment alive. And as the ambulance screeched to a halt beside them, as paramedics rushed forward with stretchers and equipment, Grace looked down at the man's face, really looked, and felt something stir deep in her chest. Something she couldn't name, something that whispered this moment would change everything. But she didn't know yet. She didn't know that the man beneath her hands was Elijah Carter, billionaire, philanthropist, and the father of the child she was about to bring into the world. She didn't know that 6 months ago, on a night she tried so hard to forget, their lives had tangled together in ways neither of them could have imagined. All she knew was that she had to save him, even if it cost her everything. Part 2. The inside of the ambulance smelled like antiseptic and fear. Grace lay on one stretcher, gripping the metal rails as another contraction tore through her body like fire. Beside her, paramedics worked frantically over the unconscious man, their voices urgent and clipped. BP dropping fast, we're losing him again. Get the oxygen up, push fluids. Grace forced herself upright, gasping through the pain. Let me help, she managed, her voice hoarse. He's bleeding from the left flank. You need to clamp lower, not higher. Ma'am, you're in active labor, the paramedic protested, his hands slick with blood. You need to lie back. Do it, or he'll bleed out before we get there. Grace's voice was sharp, commanding, the voice of a woman who had spent years saving lives and wouldn't stop now, even as her own body betrayed her. The paramedic hesitated, then repositioned his hands. The heart monitor steadied, faint, fragile but holding. Grace sagged back against the stretcher, panting, tears streaming down her face. God, please, she whispered, don't let either of us die. The ambulance burst through the emergency bay doors at Grady Memorial, and chaos erupted. 2 gurneys rolled out simultaneously, one covered in blood, one soaked in amniotic fluid. Nurses and doctors swarmed like a well-trained army. She's 9 centimeters and ruptured, one nurse shouted. Patient's male, blunt trauma, massive blood loss, another called. Grace's vision swam under the harsh fluorescent lights. As they wheeled her past the trauma room, she turned her head, catching a glimpse of the man on the other gurney. His face was pale, his chest barely rising. She didn't know his name, didn't know who he was, but she'd fought for his life like it was her own. Keep pressure on his side, she croaked as they wheeled her past. Don't lose him. Her words faded as another contraction ripped through her, fierce and unrelenting. Minutes blurred into pain, time stretching and collapsing all at once. In the trauma room, Elijah's heart rate faltered again. We need to intubate now, the trauma surgeon shouted, his hands moving with practiced precision. Blood filled the suction canister. Machines beeped in frantic rhythm. Nurses moved like dancers in a macabre ballet, their faces set in grim determination. Across the hall, Grace screamed as the next contraction hit. Push, Dr. Holloway, push, the midwife urged, her voice both gentle and firm. Grace clenched her teeth, her hands gripping the bed rails until her knuckles turned white. Just tell me, is he alive? One of the nurses hesitated, torn between duty and compassion. They're working on him. That was enough. Grace summoned the last reserves of her strength, drawing from a well she didn't know she had. Then I'll fight too, she whispered. Her cry filled the room, raw, guttural, defiant, followed by the faint, miraculous sound of a newborn's first breath. A nurse lifted the baby, tiny and fragile, his cord still pulsing with life. It's a boy. Grace smiled weakly through her tears. Micah, she breathed. His name is Micah. Then everything went black. Hours later, the hospital settled into a quieter rhythm. Machines hummed softly. Voices dropped to whispers. Grace awoke in a dim recovery room, an IV in her arm and pain burning through every inch of her body. Her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about him. The man from the accident, she asked the nurse hovering nearby. Is he alive? The nurse nodded gently. Still critical, but he made it through surgery. You saved him. Grace's lips trembled. Relief flooded her chest like a dam breaking. Thank you, Lord, she whispered. Through the window, she could see the neonatal unit down the hall, bathed in soft, warm light. A nurse cradled a tiny bundle, rocking him gently. Your son's strong, the nurse beside her said. He's a fighter. Just like his mama, Grace managed a smile, though her body still ached. Somewhere else in the hospital, a man she didn't know by name was breathing again because of her. And she, because of him, had brought life into the world in the most impossible of circumstances. In another room, Elijah stirred under the fog of anesthesia. His eyelids fluttered as machines beeped steadily beside him. For a second, caught between dreams and consciousness, he saw a woman's face, brown skin glistening with sweat, eyes filled with fierce determination and something he couldn't name. He didn't know who she was, or why her voice lingered in his mind like a half-remembered song. But deep down, something inside him whispered, "She saved you for a reason." And for the first time in years, Elijah Carter, billionaire, philanthropist, man who'd built an empire on calculated risks, prayed. Part 3. 6 months earlier, Atlanta had shimmered under a skyline of glass and ambition. The Carter Foundation Gala was the event of the season, the kind of night where champagne flowed freely, diamonds caught the light, and everyone wore their best smiles like masks. Limousines lined the circular drive, depositing the city's elite into a world of marble floors and soft jazz. Dr. Grace Holloway stood frozen near the entrance, clutching her borrowed purse like it was a shield. The deep blue gown she wore wasn't hers, it was Tasha's, borrowed for just one night, one chance to network, to find someone who might help her keep her medical license from slipping away. "Girl, you look like you belong here," Tasha had whispered earlier, fixing a curl behind Grace's ear. "Just smile, mingle, and maybe talk to someone with a fat checkbook." Grace had shot her a look. "Tasha, I came here to network, not to survive," Tasha interrupted. "Your license renewal costs $10,000. The hospital suspended your contract. You've got student loans eating you alive. So smile, Dr. Holloway, you need this." Grace had sighed, her conscience and desperation wrestling in silence. "Just one night," she'd murmured, echoing her promise to herself. Now, standing in the glittering ballroom, she felt like an imposter. Everyone here moved with the easy confidence of people who'd never worried about rent or groceries. She grabbed a glass of punch and tried to fade into the background. Across the room, Elijah Carter adjusted his cufflinks, wearing the kind of tired charm that only a man who'd lost too much could manage. Billionaire, philanthropist, widower. The city called him all that, but tonight he just felt empty. His grandfather's foundation required appearances, so here he was, surrounded by champagne, politics, and people who wanted favors. He scanned the room for an escape route, and that's when he saw her. A woman standing by the punch table, fidgeting with her glass, trying hard not to draw attention but failing effortlessly. Something about her posture, poised yet uncertain, pulled him in. Their eyes met, 1 second of stillness amid the noise. He found himself walking toward her before logic could stop him. "Seems like you hate these things as much as I do," he said, his voice deep and smooth. Grace startled slightly, then smiled. "That obvious?" "I can spot a fellow prisoner from across the room." His smile softened. "Elijah Carter." She hesitated, then extended her hand. "Grace." "No last name," he teased gently. She shrugged lightly. "Just Grace tonight." The conversation flowed easier than she'd expected. They talked about the music, the hypocrisy of galas, her dreams of opening a women's clinic one day. Elijah listened, truly listened, his eyes locked on hers like he hadn't looked at anyone in years. For the first time that evening, he laughed. "Don't take this wrong," he said, "but you don't seem like the type who comes to these events." "I'm not," she admitted. "I almost didn't come at all." "Then I'm glad you did." Something in his tone made her heart skip. The lights dimmed as a slow jazz number filled the room. Couples drifted to the dance floor. Grace hesitated, but Elijah extended his hand. "Dance with me, just Grace." She hesitated, then took it. His touch was warm, steady. The world outside their small circle seemed to fade. "You make it easy to forget everything else," he murmured. Maybe that's dangerous, she whispered back. Maybe that's what I need. Hours later, when the champagne bottles emptied and speeches ended and the gala lights flickered low, Grace found herself standing on the hotel terrace. City lights glittered below like scattered diamonds. Elijah joined her quietly. "You're different," he said softly, "real." She turned to him, "And you're lonely." He didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer. "Maybe tonight we don't have to be." The air thickened between them, unspoken pain, unspoken need. When he kissed her, she didn't resist. It was wrong, but it felt like mercy. Two broken people finding warmth in a cold world. Later, in the quiet of his penthouse, Grace whispered against his chest, "Just one night." He nodded, tracing her cheek, "Just one night." And by morning, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of lavender, a note that read, "Thank you," and a silence that would echo in both their lives forever. Part 4. The morning after the gala, Grace woke to blinding sunlight and the sharp ache of regret. The sheets smelled like cedar and faint cologne. The bed was bigger than any she'd ever slept in. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories hit. The gala, the champagne, the dance. The man whose touch had felt both strange and familiar. Elijah Carter. Her pulse quickened. She sat up quickly, spotting her borrowed clutch on the dresser. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Elijah wasn't there. His side of the bed was empty, the pillow cold. Good, that made leaving easier. She scribbled a note on hotel stationery. "Thank you for everything. It was just one night." Then she slipped out of the penthouse, as quietly as she'd come. Outside, Atlanta was already alive, sunlight bouncing off glass towers and taxi hoods. Grace caught her reflection in a passing car window. Hair messy, mascara faint, eyes uncertain. For a moment, she wondered what it would be like to stay, to see him again, to explain why she'd done what she did. But she pushed the thought away. It was survival, nothing more. A month later, she stood in her tiny bathroom staring at a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. Her knees gave out before the truth did. She sank to the floor, trembling. No, no, no. Another test, then another, all the same. Tasha found her sitting on the tile, hands over her face. "Grace, talk to me. What's going on?" Grace turned the test toward her wordlessly. Tasha's eyes widened. "Oh, Lord." "I can't do this," Grace whispered. "Not now. Not when I can barely pay rent. Not when my license renewal's still pending. I can't raise a child alone." Tasha knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her. "You're strong, Grace. You've been through worse." "Not this," Grace said, shaking her head. "He doesn't even know my last name. I don't even know if I could find him again if I wanted to." "Then don't," Tasha said softly. "You don't owe him anything. Just focus on you and that baby. God will make a way." Grace didn't answer. Her mind was a storm of fear and guilt. She wasn't sure if the tiny life inside her felt like punishment or mercy. 3 months later, she sat in the dean's office of Atlanta Medical Center, pleading her case. "I've completed all required hours, Dr. Mallister. I just need the renewal form processed, please." The gray-haired man folded his hands. "You missed the payment deadline, Dr. Holloway. I understand your situation, but policy is policy." Her throat tightened. "So that's it, after all these years of training. Until you pay the remaining fees, your license is suspended." Grace walked out, holding back tears. The hallway blurred, her world shrinking with every step. By the time she got home, the eviction notice was already taped to her door. She stood there, hands on her stomach. "It's just us now, baby," she whispered. "I'll figure it out." Across town, Elijah sat in a boardroom surrounded by glass, wealth, and emptiness. His assistant briefed him on quarterly losses, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been months since that night, and he hadn't stopped thinking about her. Grace, the nameless woman with kind eyes who'd walked away before dawn. He'd searched quietly, even hired someone to check guest lists from the gala, but there was nothing. No last name, no record. He told himself it didn't matter. She'd made her choice, and he had his empire to run. Yet some nights, when he returned to his penthouse, the silence pressed in until he almost swore he could hear her laugh echoing in the halls. His brother Marcus noticed the change. "You're slipping, Eli," he said one morning, tossing a report onto the desk. "You've been distracted since spring, still chasing ghosts." Elijah glared. "Drop it, Marcus." Marcus smirked. "Fine, but remember, sentiment doesn't pay the bills. People like us don't get fairy tale-ies." Elijah said nothing. He didn't believe in fairy tale-ies either. But that didn't stop him from missing her. Part 5. Back in the present, morning sunlight crept through the blinds of Grady Memorial Hospital. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air clean and still, the kind of calm that comes after chaos. Grace stirred awake, her body sore but her spirit lighter. Baby Micah was in the neonatal ward, stable and healthy. For the first time in days, she could breathe without fear. But when the nurse mentioned the man she'd saved was awake, Grace's heart nearly stopped. "Mr. Carter regained consciousness an hour ago," the nurse said with a smile. "He keeps asking to meet the doctor who saved him." Grace froze. "Carter?" "Yes, Elijah Carter. You know, the Elijah Carter, the billionaire from all those foundation galas." Grace's mouth went dry. "Oh, Lord," she whispered under her breath. "It really is him." The nurse laughed softly. "He's lucky you were there. They say his survival was a miracle." Grace tried to smile, but her stomach churned. It wasn't luck. It was fate, cruel and divine all at once. The man she'd tried to forget, the one whose memory she carried in her heartbeat and whose child she'd just delivered, was 2 floors above her. She waited until the nurse left before calling Tasha. "He's awake," Grace whispered into the phone. "What, Elijah's awake?" Tasha nearly screamed. "Girl, oh my God." "Don't say it." "You have to tell him, Grace. He deserves to know that baby is his." Grace's throat tightened. "No, not now. He's still recovering and I can't face him." "Grace, please." "Tasha," she cut in, her voice trembling. "I barely survived giving birth while saving his life. I can't handle that conversation too." Tasha went quiet for a moment. "Fine," she said softly, "but you can't hide forever. The truth's going to come out one way or another." Grace hung up, staring at the wall. She knew her friend was right. But she wasn't ready. Not for his judgment, not for the shame, not for the look in his eyes when he realized who she really was. 2 floors up, Elijah sat in his hospital bed, his torso bandaged, his breath shallow but steady. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and roses, a gift from his mother, Evelyn Carter, who had just left after fussing over him for an hour. He stared at the ceiling, replaying flashes of the accident, the screech of tires, the pain, the chaos, and then her. The woman's face, brown skin glistening with rain, eyes fierce and kind. "Who was she?" he asked the nurse again. "She's one of ours, Dr. Grace Holloway," the nurse replied. "She's recovering downstairs in maternity. Gave birth the same night she saved you." Elijah blinked in disbelief. "She what?" "Strongest woman I've ever seen," the nurse said proudly. "You owe her your life, Mr. Carter." Elijah smiled faintly, a rare softness breaking through his guarded expression. "Yeah," he murmured, "I guess I do." Grace tried to avoid him. For 2 days, she refused every invitation to meet. But on the 3rd morning, fate intervened. She was walking back from the NICU when a familiar voice stopped her cold. "Dr. Holloway." Her heart dropped. Slowly she turned. Elijah stood a few feet away, pale but upright, supported by a nurse. Even bandaged, he carried the same quiet authority, the same presence that had made her heart tremble months ago. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elijah's eyes softened. "You saved my life." Grace's lips parted, but no words came. I just did what anyone would have done. No, he said quietly. You did what no one else could. I remember your voice. You kept saying, don't die. Grace swallowed hard, fighting tears. I'm just glad you're alive. He smiled faintly. You were at the gala months ago, weren't you? Her heart skipped. I attend many charity events, Mr. Carter. He tilted his head, studying her. I never forget a face. Grace forced a polite smile. You should rest, you're still healing. She turned quickly, walking away before he could ask more. But his voice followed her down the hall. Grace, he called softly, almost to himself. Why does your name feel like I've known it forever? Her steps faltered, but she didn't look back. Later that night, Grace sat by the NICU window, watching Micah sleep. His tiny fingers curled around hers, warm and alive. You have his eyes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Lord, what am I supposed to do? Tasha texted her, you can't keep running forever. Grace typed back, just a little longer.